The commander wanted to find out what had caused the riot. So he took Paul to the Jewish ruling council called the Sanhedrin. When Paul got there, he spoke up and said, "Gentlemen, I stand before God with a clear conscience." Hearing this, the high priest told someone to slap Paul. Paul turned to him and said, "You whited wall, God will slap you. You told someone to slap me in direct violation of the laws of God." Someone said, "How dare you to talk against the high priest?" Immediately, Paul apologized, saying, "I did not realize that he was the high priest, because the scripture says you're not to talk against the rulers of the people." With that, Paul realized that the council was made up of two different groups, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Now, the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection from the dead. They didn't believe in angels and spirits. The Pharisees believed all these things. So Paul said, "I'm a Pharisee, and I'm being judged because I believe in the resurrection from the dead." Well, this started a discussion between the two groups. Finally, they started arguing. After a while, they were yelling at one another, and finally someone grabbed Paul in anger. Someone else pulled him away from that first person. After a while, they were fighting over him. The soldiers finally had to come in and literally rescue Paul before he was torn apart. They took him back to the barracks. That night, the Lord stood next to Paul and said, "Don't be discouraged. You have been my spokesman here in Jerusalem. You will talk for me in Rome." The next morning, 40 Jewish men band together and vowed to each other that they would not eat or drink until they killed Paul. They went to the religious leaders and they said, send for the commander and tell him to bring Paul once again so that you could question him some more. As soon as he comes near, we will kill him. What happened that Paul's nephew heard this plot. He ran to the barracks to tell Paul what he had heard. Paul called for a soldier and said, "Take this young man to the commander." The boy told the commander exactly what he had heard. The commander says, "Don't tell anyone else what you've told me." That day, the commander organized a guard for Paul, made up of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 men with spears. And that night, the commander sent Paul to Caesarea so he could be under the protection of Felix, the governor.